good evening, everybody. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Kel.
And this evening we are joined by our rock and roll Rev, Mike. How are you doing?
Nice to meet everyone. Hello.
And Councillor Morgan Rise, who I always have to say about you, Morgan, you're the only openly gay councillor in Surrey Heath. Hurrah!
Hurrah!
Cricket clap, Morgan. Cricket clap.
Thanks for joining us. Obviously, we're still without our good friends Molly and Yana, but we hope they'll be back with us next week. Yeah. But in the meantime, we're delighted to have you two with us. Thanks very much for coming along.
Thanks for having.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's always lovely to have you.
It's always
I'm
lovely
just
to have
intrigued with
a
Morgan. Which one of us is Molly and which one of us is Yana?
Oh well, I think you're Yana, Mike.
Okay.
And I'm Molly.
And you're Molly. Yes.
Don't know how you work that one out.
That whatever they wish.
Well, they'll be delighted with that. I don't know why they wouldn't be. So
Anyway,
thank you for joining us on our very serious news program.
Oh, of course. Sorry.
for anybody who's new to Muse on the News, this is our little look at some of the news stories that have hit the headlines over the last few days. So we're going to start off with your article, Cal.
We are going to start off with my article, and I've chosen an article from this week's Pink News.
Always a regular feature, Pink News.
Always a regular feature, and it's a bit of an opinion piece, really, and it's asking why the AIDS crisis wasn't taken as seriously as COVID, and then goes on to deduce because it killed gay people and not old people. It's written really from an American perspective, this article, and it goes on to say, and actually it's really quite frightening. In 1991. AIDS was the biggest killer of young men in New York, above anything else. And then by 1994, AIDS was the biggest killer amongst men in the entire United States of America. And I think that's a shocking figure and a crazy statistic, really.
Wow.
When we see the response, the reaction that we've had to COVID, and the fact that every country in the world so seriously, it really does have to make you wonder why this kind of response wasn't taken with the HIV and AIDS crisis when it first, became apparent in the 80s, isn't it?
I think the headline kind of hits the nail right on the head, and it's the fact is that the AIDS epidemic in the 80s only affected gay men, young gay men as well. They were disposable to the entire community of politicians, health professionals, newspaper. There was no reason why they would ever support the gay community in the 1980s. It was this kind of attitude of, well, they deserved it. That was I think that was an attitude of people to gay men, that they were leading these deviant, disgusting lives. And I'm not saying that's my opinion, but that's what I think the belief was, that they deserve this disease because they are diseased themselves. I think that was
young men leading exactly the same kind of lifestyles as our single young straight men that we're leading.
Yeah.
Absolutely no different besides the gender of the people they woke up next to in the morning.
And I can hear in what you say, Morgan, a pain, because I think there is a pain in it. It's just awful that it was just ignored in such a way. I wonder if the difference is as to where it came from. The corona epidemic came from Wuhan, and then it spread quite rapidly through the developed world, through the industrialized nations, whereas AIDS kind of developed in there and then spread through the what was seen as third world countries. And I guess it was almost that attitude of, actually, it doesn't affect us, so what? And it's quite disturbing. It really is disturbing. And I still wear on the 1st of December every year my AIDS badge, because it's so right that we remember, and it's just so unfortunate it wasn't taken so seriously.
I firmly believe that if the exact same AIDS epidemic that hit in the 80s and the early 90s affected straight men in the same way it affected gay men, it would have been a completely different response. because
agree with you
yeah.
entirely.
And I think that's kind of the real, and I think if anyone's been watching It's a Sin, which I have, and I know Ken and Lisa has, that really, really kind of, I think, shows it with like the unvarnished truth of the epidemic, the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. And it was how the establishment just didn't want anything to do with it. How when Jill in the show, when Jill goes to the GP and she's asking about AIDS, the doctor says, well, that doesn't affect you, so why? And then it ended up having almost the doctor accusing her or being very suspicious of her for asking questions. I think they just weren't willing to give it any thought.
It's the method of transmission, isn't it, that worried people. And actually, you know, it didn't just through that first wave of initial infections. There were a lot of haemophiliacs who were infected, and a lot of intravenous drug users who were affected. And you know, somehow they were pushed by the bite. And actually, worryingly, today, I think it was the 2019 figures showed that 40% of all HIV diagnoses in the UK were heterosexual men and women. So, you know, that the world now knows that this isn't gay
it's
disease.
not the gay disease.
And do you think that is what has altered people's perceptions of HIV, or do you think we're just now, you know, slightly more accepting of the gay community?
I think it could be both. I think I was actually speaking about this with a friend the other day, and how we were talking about why in the 80s and 90s no one responded to it. And it's like, if AIDS happened today, what would the response be? And I said it will probably be a lot faster. But then I said I actually believe that it would be faster now because of what happened in the 80s and the 90s. Because everyone did not deal with it, it almost was this catalyst of opinion change and belief change that actually I think that if it was now, if the AIDS if there was an AIDS epidemic now, I think the response would be much faster. I don't know if that's because attitudes have just changed gradually, but I do think that it's an awful thing that had to happen, that did happen. But maybe the AIDS epidemic did what happened, and because so many young men died, because it affected so many people, it did actually cause that shift in thinking. But even saying that,
I'd agree with you. You know, it was. I forgot where I was going there, but it was, you know, in the 80s, it was a very different world. And I think the world has changed so much since then. But I think the difference today is that if the AIDS epidemic was today, we're in a far more connected world, that we'd know more about it, we'd be able to research more into it. In the 80s, you just, you know, you got fed what you got fed by the BBC or the newspapers you read. And people believed what they read. There wasn't the ability to look into it and to challenge it. Whereas everything with COVID, we've seen some absolutely bizarre conspiracy theories to more information than we can take on board. And that's what's causing us a problem with COVID, actually, is there's so much disinformation out there that we're not sure what to believe. And I think if AIDS happened today, we'd be much more... I think we'd have dealt with it so much differently. And we can just look to the Ebola epidemic in Sierra Leone just a few years back, where the world responded to that in such a way to prevent the outbreak. And I ponder, is that probably a better case to compare the AIDS outbreak in the AIDS epidemic in the 80s to coronavirus? Because if they'd have responded to the AIDS issue in the 80s as they did with Ebola, it could have probably been contained.
But it was still a very slow response, Mike. And the reason
it was horrific
is because Ebola broke out in countries where it was predominantly affecting poor black people.
Yeah.
And it, you know, poor black people are very much in the same vein as our young homosexual men, aren't they? And
I agree.
they're not white cis heterosexual men, white collar workers, and they're not the people that invent the vaccines. And
I could be really cynical and say I think, you know, the response to coronavirus has probably been driven not by it affecting old folks in care homes, but more about the fear of the effects it will have on the economy. And I think that's the reality of it, rather than anything deeper than that. And we can see some of the decisions that are being made are purely based on economic reasons rather than the reasons for doing things for the preservation of society and how we live. You know, just before the show, we were talking about who's where on the vaccination lists, and it was interesting to see that New Zealand have put police and border force officials at the top of the list because that's about protecting their national security, whereas, you know, police aren't anywhere on the list in the UK, which I think is really sad.
New Zealand have done it so well, though. But it's interesting, isn't it, when you look at the speed of the response and the speed that the pharmaceutical companies have come up with a vaccine. You know, not
I agree with you entirely.
But, you know, 3, 4, 5 of them, and then when you look at the speed of which we've actually had relevant and useful HIV treatments, you know, it's only now that we're seeing the rollout of PrEP. You know, which can
it's also to remember that PrEP is not. You can't get PrEP on the NHS. You can't get it. Yeah, I mean, if any other disease or HIV is any other infection, if there was a way to prevent it being spread, that gets put onto the NHS because it saves the NHS and the public purse money. And I think it goes back to what we were saying just now about how was there this culture shift, and I think that was I think we are still going through the culture shift. Yes. I remember when I was at school only 15 years ago, it was still still stigmatized. It was still seen as the gay disease. I remember being in a classroom when I was doing my GCSEs and we were talking about, and it was someone said, "Oh, that's the gay disease. That's the gay boy disease." And it's not like this changed 20 years ago. This is 5 years ago.
I think that's only still there, isn't it? Yeah.
It's like we only need to look at how long Section 28 was still on the statute books until 2005. It was I grew up in that. I grew up in that whole environment of fear and don't talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, maybe they'll all just go away. And it was, and I think that I remember being a teen, being confused about my sexuality and being terrified of getting HIV and AIDS. Like I wasn't even having sex, and I was just terrified of this thought because what if I got it and it was this whole it's a death sentence, but when it isn't now, and it's just this whole kind of. I think there is a generation of gay men now in their 30s and into their 40s now that are just still have this fear, this innate fear, because it's been drilled into them that being gay means you're going to get HIV and it means you're going to die of AIDS.
Yeah,
when that's not
it.
And
if you get HIV, it's you're destined to die, which of course isn't the case.
And I think
going back to the time, I think part of the problem was the ignorance, because there was lack of information, lack of knowledge, and there was no real effort to get to the root of the issue that was causing this pandemic at the time. And I can remember, and I think I've mentioned it before on Muse, I can remember my mother, and she was so petrified, and bearing in mind that I grew up in Ireland and we're somewhat more conservative, I think. But she, at that time, she stopped using public loos because she was absolutely convinced that she could get HIV or AIDS from a loo seat. And I have clear memory of that.
And that shows the disinformation that was out there then, and we can compare that to now, can't we?
It's still there now. And I remember our daughter coming home from school a few years ago. She was talking about, do you remember the thing where kids used to do blood brothers and they used to, cut themselves with a pencil sharpener or something?
Oh gosh, yeah, that's going back a bit, yeah.
Yeah, she was saying that some pals of hers had done this, and we were trying to say to her, well, what about blood-borne infections and diseases? She was like, what are you talking about? It's like, have you ever heard of HIV? She was like, no, what are you talking about? And there was no education there, because even to this generation, even to her, at the time she would have been 13, 14, she had absolutely no understanding of the fact that HIV could have been transmitted, or however unlikely that is amongst teenage girls. She had no idea that it was even a possibility that HIV could be transmitted by, sharing and mixing of bloods. And there's still that ignorance and naivety.
And I think that's something that's got to be addressed, hasn't it, across the time. And hopefully, we've seen on the news this year that the amount of flu and cold has reduced this winter purely because of the precautions people are taking for COVID. So we're being more aware and covering our faces, we're washing our hands, but it's simple precautions. And HIV and AIDS can affect anybody. You don't, straight, gay, heterosexual, homosexual. It affects everyone. It's just the fact that it was given that stigma, which really, it just saddens me. It really does sadden me.
And as you say,
I think
it's the media at the time, isn't it?
Absolutely.
From Red Fox.
But I think it's really important that it's taken this long to really kind of get to a point where we're starting to really tackle HIV and AIDS. It's taken what, 40 years?
And
if this was any other pandemic, if this was any other disease or infection, a 40-year period between the first cases to a real solution would be deemed an absolute failure.
But just as a positive to wind up on, I think it's really, really wonderful to know that that there's the target of 2030 for there to be no new infections, and I think that's absolutely incredible. And if anybody wants to find out more information about where we are with testing, go and have a look at the interview we did with Nathaniel Hall. You'll find it on our YouTube.
Incredible interview.
He was an extraordinary person to speak to, and he advocates testing every 6 months if you're sexually active. And please go and do that. It's a straightforward test now. It's simple and it's quick, and there's loads of support there. So, please do. If we can get people testing regularly, then we will achieve that target of having no new infections by 2030. And that would just be incredible.
Yeah, it would be amazing stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing to remember is it's actually very easy to become to test now, and you can actually, we've just had HIV testing week, and you can still go to the Terence Higgins Trust website, and you can still find out information about that, and there'll be support for anyone who does find themselves in a situation.
Yeah, and speak to any healthcare professional,
and or text us, talk to 88840, and somebody from the Pride in Surrey team will be there to signpost you and help you and support you through that. Anyway, guys, we've given that topic a lot of conversation, and I know that we could have probably done 2 hours discussing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're going to move on now. We're going to move on to a really interesting article that Mike chose. And Mike, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, just hold for a second while I scroll up to it. So this is an article. I don't know if viewers know, but I spent 12 years as a member of a mountain rescue team, a member of Bolton Mountain Rescue Team, which is in Lancashire. And for those who are geographically aware, you'll know there's no mountains in Bolton, but we'd rescued them all. But it's something very close to my heart. So a couple of weeks ago, a mountain rescuer from Patterdale went out to rescue 2 people, one from Leicester and one from Birmingham, who'd been out camping. One of them had a medical condition, complained of chest pains, and went out, and the 60-year-old, very, very experienced mountain rescuer, sadly slipped and fell a fair distance and is now in intensive care with life-changing injuries in the event that he's probably never going to walk again. Still in intensive care this day. I saw an update today. It's just really sad. And I saw an update from a fellow mountain rescuer. Yeah, I've not done mountain rescue for over 15 years, but still feel a part of the community. But this is somebody who volunteers to go out and help those in need. And they went out, in my opinion, totally unnecessarily to rescue 2 people who shouldn't have been there. They needed to be rescued because one was having chest pains, but they shouldn't have needed to go to rescue them because they should have been at home. They shouldn't have been out on the fells. And, one of my former colleagues in mountain rescue slipped, a 60-year-old, many years of experience in mountain rescue, and has suffered life-changing injuries. I just find it absolutely disgusting that they've unwittingly caused this to happen. And what have they got? They've got a £200 fine, £200 fine each for breaking the coronavirus rules. And what's this chap got? He's got life-changing injuries at the age of 60, means he's never going to walk again. It's quite shocking. One of the mountain rescuers that was involved in rescuing his colleague said it's the worst rescue he's ever done in 25 years of being on a mountain rescue team. And I remember when I was on a mountain rescue team having to rescue one of my colleagues because he'd slipped and something had gone wrong. That's the nature of the sport we did, which was mountain climbing. But rescuing Eddie was really hard, and getting him to hospital. Thankfully, he was okay. It wasn't life-changing injuries. He just had to rest up for a few days. But this is somebody who's gone out to rescue somebody who shouldn't have been in there in the first place. And I think it's a real credit to Mountain Rescue that the comment that's come back is that they're not going to judge. They're not going to condemn the individuals they rescued, because they do it as volunteers and their job is to support people in need. But as somebody who's a formal mountain rescuer, I can make that judgment call, and I think it's wrong. They shouldn't have been there, and they shouldn't have caused this to happen. And I think it's a message that goes beyond mountain rescue. It goes to that, where are we with the rules at the moment? And there's people trying to stretch and find loopholes all over. We heard yesterday about a nightclub being broke up in Birmingham. We've heard about various things being broken up that are putting people's lives in danger. You know, I have to say I'm not a great fan of the current government, but they're doing the best they can. And these rules are trying to keep us all safe to prevent the spread. And we just find people stretching them. Yeah. On every single turn. Just get the simple message, stay at home. You know, we've got more people in hospital now than we had in the first lockdown. Yeah. Just stay at home.
It's really, really frustrating. And I think, you know, they absolutely shouldn't have been on the mountain. They shouldn't have been, because you go for your stroll in your local community, around your house in the States, and in your
and they were camping there.
Down the
I can see the draw in it, because I've been there, I've done it, I've camped on the side of the mountain. It's wonderful.
Look, we all know what cabin fever feels like.
At the moment.
Yeah, it's not okay. It really isn't. But I think that this issue also stretches to another kind of view of it too. You know, people who take to the mountains in dangerous conditions. You know, and I've got a probably, well, nowhere near the same level of experience on the mountains as you, Mike. But in my youth, I spent a lot of time in the mountains. A lot of time, and very sadly lost a friend to a nasty fall, and it was a really simple error, just a misplaced foot.
It makes all the difference. I've had certainly I've not been without my falls, and I remember certainly doing one training exercise. A very good friend of mine who's the age I am now. You know, when he was the age I am now, I was in my teens, probably 19, and I slipped on scree. And I was going over a 50-foot drop, and Craig, bless him, grabbed me and said, "Not today, mate," and pulled me back up. And I remember saying to him, "Please, you know, if it's a decision between me going and you going, you let me go, buddy," because he had a wife and a child at the time. I didn't, and the reason that those of us that volunteered for mountain rescue and continue to volunteer is it's a sport we love. And there's nothing as exhilarating as going out on the hills and climbing in ice, snow climbing, actually getting to a high peak. But it's when you do it purposely, knowing that you're breaking rules that have been set there for all our safety, it really does. It just upsets me.
It's a really sad story.
It's really not the reason people do it, is it? I think we all know that the people that work in our rescue and emergency services, they all respond to, you know, self-inflicted injuries and people that have been silly.
Accidents happen, and
they do it because that's their vocation and that's their calling, and they want to help.
Absolutely. And the thing a lot of people forget is mountain rescue, search and rescue. You know, we're very blessed in Surrey with Surrey Search and Rescue, lifeboats. They're all volunteers. So these people are doing this on top of their normal day jobs. So the fact that somebody's been injured, has had life-changing injuries, means that he's now not going to be able to work to support his family. And it is really difficult when you think of it like that. You know, I follow Surrey Search and Rescue, have a great deal of respect for them, and I'd love to be able to volunteer, but been there, done it, got the t-shirt, thank you very much. But they're out every day supporting our community. And it does go wrong, and that's why you train and train and train and train to make sure it doesn't go wrong. But sometimes it does. That's the nature of what happens. But I think this, for me, the key message of this is, please follow the rules. It's not some politicians being awkward because they've got the power and can make the rules. It's because they're trying to protect us all and make sure this horrid virus we've just spoke about, you know, with the AIDS epidemic, and it would have been different, but it's trying to protect us all from this.
I think the one thing, the really striking parts of that article when I read it was after the rescuer had their accident, they then was another rescue team had to go out, and it was putting even more people into the dangerous environment, and not only just dangerous from climbing, but also dangerous of placing them into a potential of catching COVID, and it's just kind of it snowballed, it was the needless action of one person or two people at the beginning caused this kind of exponential increase of more people having to go out to rescue not only the rescuer, but also the person who called it at the beginning, and it's just kind of it could just spiral out of control very quickly, and then that's what it goes back to what you're saying, Mike, is that stay at home. Our emergency service workers are working hard as it is to add even more onto it, just causes even more pressure onto hospitals and to local services. So it is really, do stay at home and follow the rules. I know they are difficult, and especially if you're furloughed and you're at home and it's like you do start to get cabin fever and you just want to do something out of the ordinary, but please do it safely and do it sensibly.
And I think we're in a situation now where that light at the end of the tunnel is getting tantalizingly close, isn't it? And I think if we can just buckle down for another little while, we'll be at a point of success with this. Yeah. And the end is in sight. We just need to be patient and just hold tough for just a little while longer. Anyway, I'm going to wind up.
Yeah, with that.
Yeah, go for it.
With that, we'll be here all night, Jess. Honestly,
we could be quite easily.
These boys, honestly. Right, so we're going to move on to. I'm not sure whose this was.
Morgan.
It's yours, Morgan.
My one.
Wonderful story.
Yes.
About this year's census.
Yes. So in the census this year, for the first time ever, there's going to be an option to provide a response to your gender identity, which I think is a really good move of the census service to do. It's optional, so there is no requirement for anyone to do this. It is an option to provide, and it will be a free form. I believe it's going to be a free form way of providing a response. So it's not going to be a tick box. It's going to there will be a place where anyone can provide the gender identity that they identify with. And I think what this will be really important for is for non-binary folk, that there is under law, even as the debate rages with regards to trans rights, I think the pressure on non-binary folk as well is really, really intense. There is no real legal definition or legal protection. And what is also really interesting, when I was reading through it, it's the ONS is speaking about that there was never in history has there ever really been a evidence gathering exercise like this in terms of to be able to not necessarily identify, but to be able to quantify a response of how many trans people there are in the United Kingdom, how many people are non-binary, how many people have different gender identities. So I think this will be really good data for everyone, for the community moving forward, but also for public services moving forward, because they can then understand that instead of just having this kind of abstract idea of trans people living in a community, they can say, well, here we can identify that there is this number. So do we need to provide greater services for gender dysphoria or gender identity? Do certain areas need more gender identity clinics, etc.? So I think that's a really good thing forward.
It's a fantastic thing, Morgan.
Yes.
It really is. But my query with it would be, do we feel that it would be more useful to have more of a tick box scenario? Because what concerns me is every year we know that a week after the census, the Sun run a big thing saying we've got 400 million Jedis in the world this year. What worries me is people that are bored at home, and these hilarious people that are going to write down, I identify as a dishwasher, and to them it's just a joke, but they're not actually participating and they're not providing the information in a way in which it is going to be useful for our public services. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a valid concern, and I think there's people will always try to make themselves sound funny or make a joke, but the ONS have, it just is reported in the article that the ONS has undertaken really research to ensure that only genuine identities are recorded. So while someone could say that they identify as a dishwasher, from what I've understood of the article is that that essentially would be discarded. And or not, it would not be recorded against trans or non-binary.
And you're right there, Margaret.
Deciphers what is a genuine identity and what is a joke identity?
That is a question that is a very good question. I think that would have to be something that would come out after the census has been completed and the full data has been gathered, so that we can actually see, have millions of people said they identify as a dishwasher, or have only 5 people said it?
I know in 2011 there was lots of people that put down that they were Jedi because of a social media campaign that went on, and people believed that red herring, that if so many thousand put down they were a Jedi, it became a recognised religion. And ONS were very good and said, no, we know this is a wind-up. So I think we have to trust ONS. What I find quite shocking in this is a statement that I read in the report. Can I just read it to you? Because I found this quite shocking.
Yeah.
Previous statistics about LGBT plus people have been little more than estimates, and the needs and experiences of our community have been hidden. I just find that almost unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's why it's very difficult.
Estimates, and this is why this is so important.
Yeah, it's been very difficult for organisations like ours and other pride organisations
absolutely
up and down the country to justify funding applications for projects. You know, so it will for us be a huge benefit to have those statistics available.
Slightly more beneficial, but then you have to remember there are certainly at the moment, with regards to the experience we're all going through with COVID-19, a lot of people are back home, and a lot of people aren't out, and a lot of younger people aren't out, and a lot of people aren't in a position to be able to be honest on their census, and a lot of people still have mum and dad, or the wife, filling out the census for them, and there are a lot of experiences and people who aren't going to be recorded in their honest truth, because of the way the census is conducted in terms of a unit and a house rather than an individual.
I think, but what I think this as a good first step is that it's on this census, and then I'm assuming hopefully in the 2031 census it will be. And then, as I know, it takes time, as the censuses roll on and people just it becomes much more accustomed to seeing that gender identity question there, and then it becomes much more commonplace. And people, the jokey responses will decrease, normalize. And I think it's also what it also says is that Stonewall have said that census data, for example, on age, on race, on a load of other protected characteristics under the Equality Act, has been really vital information in kind of targeting campaigns and targeting resources to tackle the kind of the disadvantaged groups. So hopefully this is what, for LGBTQ people, this is what will be the next step, is that this will be able to direct public services to say, and I think it does go back to what I'm saying is for example, if the census shows that in the north there are tons and tons of trans people, I think that could then be a signal to government to say, well, actually, we need to make sure that we're providing services in the north rather than forcing all trans people to go through Tavistock and Portman. And it's just a real kind of, it needs to be addressed. I think that we need to make sure that our actual health services are providing services across the country rather than just in one place that's specialised. And Tavistock do great work, but it's one identity clinic can't do everything.
And I think that then adds to the message, isn't it? When you fill in your census in the coming weeks, whatever you do, be honest with it. Don't see it as a bit of a joke. Be honest with it, because it affects how public funding is spent over the coming 10 years. And it's so key. And it's, for me, certainly, and for most people that probably look into family history and things like that, the census is so important. And I remember doing the one in 2011 and getting this huge wad of paper and thinking, oh my goodness. But I know this year it's all going to be online. It's just do it, be honest with it, and don't see it as a joke, because it is actually key as to how we move forward as a nation.
And hopefully, if it is online, it could provide that sense of anonymity almost to people to be truthful, because there is truth in the anonymous. And people feel that, oh, I'm just filling out on a form online, I do this 5 times a day, and it's almost become second nature to recognize their truth and to really accept who they are. Because I think could be lots of people who are trans or non-binary or gay, lesbian, across the entire spectrum. I think it could be that point of actual realization where they actually say, you know what, I am, and this is the first time that I've actually accepted who I am, and I'm going to be proud, and I'm going to fill out this official document and go forward. But just one thing I do want to say extra, I think while I do think this is the first step, I am concerned that this could then be seen as, well, we've done the census, do we need to do anything else from a government response? I think this is very much a first step. And I think it's vital for campaigning groups like Pride in Surrey and Pride groups across the country that we continue to say and continue to fight for legal recognition of trans people and non-binary folks. And it's that, especially on passports, on identity documents such as driver's license, that there is the option to mark X or whatever. That is, we can't let one good step be the only step forward.
And I think the other side of it is the census is a household census. So it's one person in the household completing it, and the household might be 6, 7, 8 people. And you're not going to get the true reflection of everyone.
No.
And it's the only way you're going to get true data is to do an individual census. And data is only as good as the person who's inputting it. And we know that from so much stuff that we do.
Yeah, there should be a young people census. Do you not feel like, as a census comes out to our house and mum and or dad put it out, but what about a census that goes to school where, we could be missing literally tens of thousands of young people with identities that their parents don't know about. And they're not
that would be quite an exciting thing to do, because I know of several young people who are, questioning their sexuality, receiving support from various groups, but don't want parents, whatever, to know about it. And it's really important they get that support. But if you were asked them, if they were asked to fill it in front of mum and dad, they'd put one thing. But if they were asked to fill it in at school, they'd probably put something else.
Maybe it's something to think about for future.
I think that's that. But maybe for Pride in Surrey to ask the question of, is it worth doing a secondary school census to see across the whole county?
Well, we're doing lots of work with the secondary schools at the moment, so
we do some amazing stuff. So it's amazing.
Get the government on board with that. That's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, boys, what are we moving on to?
We're gonna skip one because we're running a bit behind schedule, but we're going to go on to a fantastic story that hit the headlines today as we're recording, and it is about sacked LGBT veterans who have now been told that they can reclaim their removed medals, and I think that this is just a wonderful step forward. I mean, my view is it should really never have been the case that they were stripped of them in the first place. And I'm sure that everybody here would agree with that. But I am so pleased that they can get those medals back.
One of the things I was looking at this, and having been somebody that served, I almost broke into tears when I read the line that says they cut the medal off my chest with a big pair of scissors. And I wanted to... I'm just speechless. I think that's the only word to say. I'm absolutely gobsmacked. And it shocks me that this was as late as 2000 that this abhorrent behavior happened. I just find it bizarre. I had the real honor of serving alongside people from the LGBTQ community. I had the real honor of serving alongside people from all ethnicities, all backgrounds, all protected characteristics. And it was a real honor because they were blooming good soldiers, and that's all that mattered. And I read this with real sadness, because this isn't an armed forces I recognise. And what shocks me even more is that it's taken till 2021 to fix this. Seriously? You know, surely this should have been something that was fixed years ago. And all I can say is to the individuals that have fought for this, all credit to you. I am so pleased that you've got the outcome you truly deserve. There is no way on this earth you should have had your long service and good conduct medals removed. And there's no way you should have had your service medals removed. It's just disgusting behaviour. And even more so, the fact that they were cut off your chest with a pair of scissors in front of your peers. Yeah, there is no words. I just find it.
Action is just, it's so humiliating,
It's
isn't it?
shaming.
You know, it is. That's the word. It's complete shaming for just being who you are, and actually, you know, being brave enough to be who you are in the armed forces. I think perhaps, and Mike, you might be able to help with this one. It might be a very difficult thing to do, and I know that you, throughout your career, you've always been extremely, you know, accepting of everybody that's crossed your path.
Absolutely. And this is why this almost moves me to tears, because I just find this so unbelievable. I'm good friends with, he's currently, he might still be a warrant officer class 1. He might be a captain. I don't know where he's up to now. But a chap who was in the infantry, he got married to his husband. A wonderful wedding. The biggest complaint we had of the wedding was that he only invited a select few, and the rest of us in the battalion weren't invited. And the annoyance in the battalion was he'd actually messed up the good excuse for a party with the rest of us by just inviting a handful. So there was only one option, and that was to have a big party in the mess when him and Dom got back. So we had a party to celebrate the wedding. Nobody cares. That's not the right word. Everyone loves people for who they are. As long as you're a good soldier, that's all that matters. And I think that says a huge amount about the ethos change in the armed forces in the last 20 years. You know, in 2000, I heard of stories of chaplains who before 2000 were allegedly, and I hate this term, dobbing people in for being gay. I just can't even begin to imagine why one would consider that. It doesn't, for me, portray the love of Christ. But I just find it really shocking that it's taken 20 years for the government to realise that the actions they took were fundamentally wrong. And these individuals...
That might be. Why do you think it took so long? You know, after legalisation and everything else, I mean, why was that practice still in place? And how come it's taken till 2021 to sort it out?
That's a good question. I'd probably put it down to the fact that nobody was probably willing to take the case on their behalf, and they, you know, the case I guess has been there, but I'd not heard of this until a couple of years back, and I'd not even considered that medals were stripped from people, and I think it goes beyond. Well, I know it goes beyond the medals. The medals weren't just removed; pensions were removed. And, you know, everything they'd worked for 20 odd years in the career was removed. It's wrong. It's just fundamentally wrong. And why is it taking so long to hit the press? Probably because nobody's been willing to voice their opinion loud enough.
I think it goes back to what we've been saying throughout the entire program, is that for so long, people just didn't care about gay people.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think that's people. It has taken gay people, LGBTQ people, ourselves, to fight for our rights. People weren't willing to give them to us. We had to fight for them, and it's taken 40 years to get from a point of liberation, the demand for liberation, to a point now where we are finally starting to get some level of equality. And I think a lot of people think, oh, well, you've got the right to marry, blah 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 blah, that's enough, isn't it? And but it's the historic abuse that has taken place, abuse that has taken place, and not but to the LGBTQ community is so prevalent, and has been so ingrained in kind of the societal fabric of this country. And this is across the entire world as well. It's not just Britain. It's that the gay people and trans people are just different.
Well,
they
we can
stay over
look
there.
back to
And I
America,
think-
can't we? That, even just until 4 weeks ago,
Yeah.
it was illegal to be transgender and serve in the American Armed Forces.
But
I
it's the
don't know
people-
about you. I was flabbergasted that Trump passed that, and I was so pleased that Biden abolished that on the day he was appointed.
But it's the people making the decisions. That's the point, isn't it, Mike? And the people that are making
Absolutely.
these decisions are let's face it, the
White
elite
men.
who passed through Sandhurst and they've made the decision. And actually, the troops now that are serving, before the argument was that gay men couldn't serve in the army because they would, they
want to bomb everyone.
they'd be in the way, and there'd be an interference. And actually, now lads that are serving in the army, they're going, well, my brother's gay, my sister's gay, my Uncle Ken's gay, in fact, my mum's a gay, and it's not a problem because that's what my life looks like, Mush.
Yeah.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Kel.
Don't make that decision now.
And I
I
think
think
it's
you've hit the
also
nail on the head. There's 2 points there. Is that people couldn't care less. They just, society has changed so much in our lifetimes. The 4 of us sat here that I think the law and the legislation is catching up with that. And we can see that in churches, we can see that in all areas of society, that things are catching up. And I'm so pleased I'm part of a denomination that caught up 10 years before most denominations. But I just find it shocking that the armed forces are still catching up with this. What I find, as I say, just reading, I've got it up on my other screen, that it's not just about the medals. And as somebody who served, the medals are far more important than anything else because it says what you've done. But it's the pensions, it's the rank, it's the what you've achieved that's important. And I just find it shocking that I just find it shocking that it's 2021 and it's taken till now to agree with this. And
I do wonder.
I totally forgot.
Sorry, I do wonder what the reaction has been to people who have been told that they can have their medals back. I think I'd be inclined to say, take your medal and shove it. Actually, I don't want it.
But also, what has that done to people that have suddenly had a letter out of the blue saying your granddad can have his medal back? Who people had no idea granddad had been kicked out of the army for being gay.
Yeah.
And it's kind of worms, isn't it?
Is that shaming attitude? Is that shaming behaviour? And I can only imagine that these former servicemen and women were so ashamed of what had happened that they didn't talk about it. And I think I think is what Mike was saying, is that people weren't the people who it was done to weren't really willing to talk about it because they would then have to relive that trauma. And I think it's important for allies of the LGBTQ movement to actually use your voice to say, actually, no, this is not appropriate. And I think that if we are to make real change, it's almost so much that we as LGBTQ people can do. At a point, everyone else has to get on board, and if you're not going to get on board, it's going to be it's difficult for us. But reading the article, I was shocked as well.
Yeah,
I think everyone knows that in the past gay men had been kicked out of the army, but you never think that's in 2000. You think we've surely gone past that by that point. And why would they take those? Yeah.
That's what shocked me. It was 2000. And I know, as in the United Reformed Church, we were having discussions in the 90s about making decisions about homosexuality and the LGBTQ community then. And we were making decisions that were all accepting, totally comfortable with things. And I think that's what stunned me with this was, as you say, it was only 2000 that it was accepted. And it's, we can all think back. We probably all know what we were doing on midnight of the millennium. And there's some people going, "You're so old."
Only 11.
Okay, but the 3 of us higher up on the screen know what we were doing that night. But it's not that long ago.
No, it's not.
That's what I think's shocking in this.
And I think it's also I don't think I would be a good fit for the army. I don't think I would fit in. But I'm to anyone that wishes to serve in the armed forces, whether you're gay, straight, trans, non-binary, whatever. I mean, surely the army doesn't. Why would the army want to turn people away who want to serve?
you'd fit in because of the image the army has portrayed up to
I
now.
would say
Now I
these
just have
days
problems
there
with
would-
authority. So
Yeah, but I say if you didn't have problems with authority, these days there wouldn't be a problem at all. And I had one of the most wonderful people I served with was a warrant officer in Afghanistan. I can't remember her name, but she had para wings and the dagger before women were allowed to serve in the paras and the commandos. She joined the armed forces as a man, went through gender reassignment, and was the first transgender warrant officer, and served in Afghanistan for far too long than was, in my opinion, acceptable, because it was a place to hide. She was a great ammunitions technician, explosive ordnance officer. And I had lunch with her nearly every day of my 6-month tour in Afghanistan. She was taller than me, wider than me, a deeper voice than me. It's not difficult, but was the most loving, caring woman you could ever meet. And actually, the armed forces were accepting of her as an individual because of the professionalism and the skills she brought. And that was 2014. And that's why I'll be honest, why I'm so shocked to read an article in 2021 that it's taken another 7 years since then. I'm just thinking of my maths then. It's taken so long to be so accepting. I just find it unbelievable. And I think the other side of it is, we had our first transgender officer was living in Camberley, and now has, go on, you can remind me of the name because I can see the face, but I can't see the name.
Hannah Graff.
Hannah, yeah. Hannah was absolutely lovely, served with the REME, lived in Camberley, it's now moved away. I just find it, we've become so accepting in the armed forces are so accepting. It's shocking. It's taken so long down the line to reinstate these awards, honours and pensions. When
let's hope it's a case of the administration catching up. And I think
I fear, though, there's probably still some individuals in there that probably shouldn't be serving that need to be.
Like everywhere, though. Hey,
There's always a few.
Unfortunately, it's everywhere. But I think it's a brilliant step forward and a really positive news.
Huge step forward, and we could waffle again for ages.
But you mentioned being professional, and what was the word you used? Professional and highest standard of work and stuff.
I don't know.
We've got 2 professionals who are usually with us all the time, but haven't been for the last couple of weeks. However, Yana has sent us her word of the week.
Yeah, so most of our regular viewers will know Yana's word of the week, where she picks the most beautiful, crazy word from the English language you can find, and we have a little bit of a chat about it. But today we've got this recorded, and it's been sent to us from snowy Slovakia, actually.
Very snowy.
And we would like you to see this week's word of the week. Here we go.
Hi everyone, it's Yana and Molly. Hi, good evening everyone. So a little birdie told us that you might be missing Jana's word of the week. So we thought we would tune in from Slovakia and send you a little message, and Jana can let us know what her word of the week is.
The word of the week for me this week is sempiternal. Means a lot right now. It's a beautiful word, and sempiternal means eternal, unchanging and everlasting. And that's just like my love towards my mum.
Absolutely beautiful word. It looks like, it just feels like it means so much. It's got so much depth, but I had never heard of it. So we were wondering, have you ever heard of it? So let us know. We look forward to hearing the chat. While we're on as well, it's actually Jana's birthday today. So I wanted to wish her a big happy birthday. It's not the happiest of occasions, but we're here with some family. So we're going to have a drink and raise a toast. So hopefully you can raise a toast with us as well.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Girls, hopefully we'll be doing the Muse on the News with you soon. We're really missing you, and we're missing everybody. So hopefully see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
All I can say is happy birthday, Yana.
Yes, happy birthday, Yana, with my squash.
But Mike, come on, you're a minister. You must use the word sempiternal all the time, right?
I have never heard of it before. I'll be honest.
Yeah. Stick it in the diary. Brilliant for weddings and funerals.
I once used a big word in an assignment when I was studying theology, to be a minister. And it got highlighted by my tutor, who said, "You found this in the dictionary, didn't you?"
That's where we'll find words.
He wasn't far wrong. I'd opened the dictionary, found a word, and thought I've got to include that in my assignment, and I got caught out. So I've never heard of this one, but it's one I must try and fit into a sermon. What a beautiful word!
It's a beautiful word, and I can
Yeah.
imagine that it's very, very kind of an important word to Yana at the moment. So Yana, I will say, Yana, happy birthday, and all my love to you at this moment. It must be difficult for you, but keep the faith almost.
We miss you both and look forward to seeing you both back. So yeah, we're here for you guys.
We miss them both dreadfully, but I think the lovely thing is that Yana was able to travel back and be with her family at this time, and I think it's probably a bonus that she's getting to spend this birthday, and also it was her mum's birthday just the other day as well. So she's getting to spend both those with her family in Slovakia, and that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. We'll look forward to welcoming them back next week to the UK, and hopefully back online with us soon as well.
Absolutely. Have a safe journey, girls. That's the main thing.
But you know what? We're going to move on from our friends in Slovakia currently, and we're going to thank our friends, you guys, and thank you so much for coming on and going on about nothing with us. Really, we've had a really nice time. We could have done a couple of on each of these stories, couldn't we?
I am a politician. I can talk about nothing forever. So,
you know what though? Do you know what? We spoke to a man recently, and he could speak for probably 6 or 7 days about one subject, and that subject could be nothing, and he would find it and he would roll with it. And I just want to play our viewers something right now from a friend of Pride in Surrey, just so people realise that they are not alone.
Hi guys, I'm Stephen K. Amos, and welcome to Pride in Surrey for, of course, LGBT History Month. Now, I've got to say, folks, if you are in lockdown and you're struggling or you are alone, sometimes it's easier just to reach out and talk to somebody, or just send a text. Text talk to 88440. You are not alone. It's Pride, isn't it? Pride Surrey. Reach out.
Confidential service powered by Pride in Surrey. Text are charged at your standard rate. Terms and conditions apply.
Our friends,
so lovely.
I mean, if it's pride in it is not your slogan from now on, you're missing a trick. That is the best thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, we smoked that little bit and we're playing it on a loop.
He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He knows the power of words. It's pride.
It's pride in it. It's pride in it.
Pride in it. Pride in it.
What an
Awesome.
absolutely lovely, brilliant, hilarious, kind, witty, intelligent man he is. And if anyone ever sees him at a bus stop, I encourage you to stop him, poke him in the arm, and talk at him for hours and hours and hours, because he's just blinking brilliant.
Yeah, and for somebody like him to take time to speak to little old us, it was a great honor and privilege. If you'd like to check out that interview, you can get that on YouTube. And Mike, you might like to have a watch of that one, because he talks about the time he met the Pope and he grilled him on his opinions on the LGBT community.
Yeah,
and
I met the Pope once, but that's another story.
Well, you can tell us that another
Was
time.
it at a bus stop on the call?
Sorry?
Was it at a bus stop?
No. There were a lot of people there, though.
I met the Pope at a rugby game.
Okay, you win.
Is that someone called Pope?
It wasn't
someone
a Pope.
called Pope?
Was that an Irish rugby game and somebody was dressed
Wearing
up
a hat.
as Patrick?
Can I just ask the question, were you sober at the time? Because I was.
Well, no, it wasn't. I know it wasn't Pope Frank. It was a different Pope.
Which one? Like, come back from the dead Pope, or
John Paul II?
It was Pope Guinness.
Pope Guinness?
Pope Guinness, okay. I once met William I can't say it. I've only had one glass of fizz and it's gone. Okay.
It's
Finish
the
off.
balls. It's the lad.
I've
Who are
got...
we going to say?
Oh, okay, you're waiting for me.
I thought you just chose them.
William and Harry. And when I trained at Sandhurst, they were both training for the army. And that was very special, but that's another story for another day.
Are they actually really nice boys?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
But they didn't say, is pride in it, did they?
No, I bet they didn't.
No.
Right,
I don't think they did.
Right, but William and Harry are not as
I just remember William opening the door in the naffy at Sandhurst going, hello, sir, to me, and me chuckling and saying, that'll be the last time you'll say that. And yeah, it was. I've called him sir ever since.
They seem like nice lads, don't they?
Oh, cracking lads, cracking lads.
As down to earth as it's possible to be when you're in that.
And I think it's, you know, it's great that we've got them. Certainly William, you know, as our future monarch. I think it's wonderful. Great guys. So.
First royal to appear on the front of a gay magazine. He was
first royal to appear on Attitude magazine. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. He's a modern monarch.
Yeah, maybe we should try and get an interview with him.
Maybe we should just phone him up and say, Will, we didn't choose
I
that.
don't know why you're laughing.
Talk to us.
It's impossible, Morgan.
No, it's not impossible.
See what we can achieve at Pride.
Don't email, but send a letter. Send a letter,
done.
because if you send a letter, they always respond to
No, do you know
their
what
letters.
they always respond to? With the royalty, you have to just know the ins, and you have to say raven.
Oh.
You have to say what?
A raven with the message saying it's pride, in it.
It's pride, innit?
In it.
In it.
Right, listen, gentlemen, we've gone over the hour.
Way over the half hour. We allocated
Yana
to
and
this
Molly will be
programme.
given out to us for not sticking to our time limit. We
They'll
should
be very cross.
yeah.
Sorry,
However,
Anna and Molly.
We don't like to upset our lesbians. But thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for being our honorary lesbians for this evening.
Always
I'll be
pleased to be
your
a lesbian.
honorary. I can't say it, but anytime.
Honorary.
Honorary lesbian anytime.
And thank you so much. Thank
well,
you.
see you soon. Mwah.
We'll see you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. We are privileged today to be joined by Di Stiff from the Surrey History Centre, and she is going to give us a history lesson today. And today we're going to be speaking all about Alan Turing. How are you doing, Di?
I'm great, thanks, Kel.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know our community and our viewers are going to be really interested to hear some more about, the legend that is Alan Turing. And I know they're going to be particularly interested in learning about his links to Surrey. So thank you for that. So shall I drop out and we'll let you give us your lesson?
Yeah, absolutely fine. That's great. And it's always a pleasure to come on and speak to you. So many of you will know that it's LGBT plus History Month, and the theme for this year is Mind, Body, Spirit. And really, we have taken that to be the presentation of somebody's whole self. So their mind, their body, their spirit, and being viewed as their whole person, not just in isolation of one particular thing. And the campaign statement says that with rates of mental illness, addiction, and suicide still at epidemic proportions in the LGBTQ plus community, it was important that the 2021 History Month addressed that subject. And I think that's really key. So with this in mind for 2021, Surrey History Centre is focusing on Alan Turing, who was a mathematician, cryptanalyst, and obviously a code breaker. So we created a new podcast, revealing his little known connections with Guildford. And we did this in connection with a guy called Paul Backhouse, who is a local touring expert and also a Guildford town guide. And he leads the touring walk that after lockdown you can go on in Guildford. So I'll just reveal a little bit about the man behind the genius, because most of you will know that his work is in founding modern computing, and also that his work had an immense impact on the history of the 20th century, not least for breaking the German Enigma encoder during the Second World War. But his connections with Surrey are less well known. So Alan Turing's parents lived in Ennismore Avenue in Guildford from 1927. And there is a blue plaque on the house. And I met the owners of the house, who were so proud to live where Alan Turing had lived. And they said to me when they renovated the house that they had every floorboard up in the property, because they thought that just in case he might have left a time capsule underneath or something underneath, which I think is really, that's just such fun. And Guildford gave Turing his first proper home, and he was there during the school holidays when he was back from school. And he would go for long walks in Stoke Park and on the North Downs. And he also developed an interest in astronomy. And so from his Guildford home, he spent hours stargazing and drawing the night sky. And he continued to visit the family home whilst he was at university as well. So at Surrey History Centre, we have marriage registers for the whole county. And one of those marriage registers has the marriage of Alan Turing's brother, John, who was married in Guildford in 1934. And Alan was his best man. And the wedding was reported in the Surrey Advertiser newspaper. And John Turing and his wife moved to a house in Jenner Road in Guildford, where they raised a family. And Alan would visit them, and he would delight his nieces by solving cracker puzzles at Christmas, which I think is a really lovely thought, that he was part of a family who adored him. But probably Turing's most famous achievement was his contribution to the breaking of the Enigma, the encoder used by the Germans to encrypt secret messages during the Second World War. And in March 1940, Turing's device, which was later known as the Turing-Welshman bomb, came into operation at Bletchley Park. And the bomb was a series of electromechanically driven rotors, which used fragments of decoded Enigma text to calculate any match in the setting of correspondence rotor in the Enigma encoder. And this was then used to scramble the messages. And although shy, Turing did not conceal his homosexuality from his friends at all, but whilst at Bletchley Park, he became engaged to Joan Clark, who was a fellow code breaker. And Joan always knew that Alan was gay, and although they got on really well and were the best of friends, Alan felt that the situation would be unfair on both of them, so he broke off their engagement. After the war in 1945, Turing was awarded an OBE for his war work, and at this time he also began working at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington. During this time he lodged in Hampton, but he spent a lot of his time in Surrey, and he was a keen athlete, so he was known to run in Guildford as well as Westcott and Leith Hill, and he often ran the 18 miles between his home in Hampton and his brother's house in Guildford. And he was a member of the Walton Athletics Club. And he was a world-class marathon runner, and I think a lot of people don't realise that about Turing. They think about him doing, the coding work, but they don't realise about his other talents. So he was a world-class marathon runner, and he came 5th in the trials for the 1948 Olympics, which I think is astonishing. I also think it's absolutely fascinating that you can literally walk in Turing's footsteps in Guildford, and I think that's something that Paul Backhouse, the local expert and author who did the podcast with us, was intrigued by, and it helped create this town walk that people can now go on and be inspired by. And if you get a chance to look at Paul's book and go on the Turing walk when lockdown finishes, then please do, because it's really enlightening. And I think a lot of people would find it really fascinating. Turing's last visit to Guildford was for Christmas 1953, and that was 6 months before his death. But it was Turing's short affair with Arnold Murray in 1952, whilst working at the computing laboratory at Manchester University, that brought his private life into conflict with the social mores of the day. And Turing discovered that Murray was an accomplice to burgling his house, and he reported him to the police, and he naively made a false statement about their relationship. And as sex between men was then illegal, whether in private or in public, both Turing and Murray were prosecuted for gross indecency under Section 11 of the archaic Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885. So if you think this is 1952 that Turing is being prosecuted, but he's being prosecuted under a law that is 1885, and it's just, it is archaic. But Turing was unashamed of his admission, and he wrongly believed that the law was about to change. But in reality, the Wolfenden report, which suggested that sex between consenting adult men would no longer be a crime and should no longer be a crime, that didn't appear until 1957. And it wasn't until 1967 that the Sexual Offences Act partially decriminalised sex between men in private. So the choice facing Turing was stark, and rather than imprisonment, he chose probation, and a clause of that probation was that he participated in a newly developed year-long chemical hormone treatment program. And it was believed that this could have affected his state of mind. And in June 1954, Turing ate an apple, apparently laced with cyanide, and he died. But he left no suicide note, and his mother never accepted the coroner's verdict. She believed that he ingested the poison accidentally in the tiny lab that he'd set up in his flat. But there's also a theory that Turing may have been targeted as a gay man, because with his knowledge, he would have been viewed as a threat to national security. And on the 12th of June 1954, Turing was cremated at Woking Crematorium, and his ashes were scattered there on the place where his father's ashes were scattered. But he's commemorated with a statue at the University of Surrey campus, and also at G Live in Guildford, where there's the Cedar Light installation. Plus he has roads named after him on the research park as well. And there's a Turing quote which says, "Sometimes it is the people no one can imagine anything of who do the things no one can imagine." And I think that is so apt for Turing, not only for his code-breaking work and his immense contribution to computing, but also if you fast forward to August 2009, it was for Turing that a petition urging the British government to apologise for his persecution received more than 30,000 signatures. And a month later, then Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a formal apology recognising Turing's contribution to the war effort and saying he deserved better. And on Christmas Eve 2013, the Queen signed a pardon for Turing's conviction with immediate effect. And then since 2017, in England and Wales, the Alan Turing Law has been an informal term for provisions in the Policing and Crime Act for the pardoning of gay men cautioned or convicted under that archaic historic legislation. So as a result, thousands of men have been exonerated since, and that's because of Alan Turing. And of course, Turing will be the face of the new Bank of England £20 note as well. I think what I find important to note about Turing's story is that, like many gay men and lesbian women at the time, he lived a hidden and haunted life, and they lived hidden and haunted lives. And many thousands of them entered into marriages of convenience to avoid being sacked from their jobs or suffer awkward questions or social isolation. But when it came, the 1967 Act was seen as ending the blackmailer's charter that had resulted in so many suicides like Turing. And for Turing, his motivation for his suicide is not fully known, but the chemical rehabilitation which he endured, along with his criminalisation, must surely have been a factor, because it barred him from going to the USA and it barred him from working for the government's code-breaking centre at GCHQ. And this is why, with Body, Mind and Spirit, you have to see the whole person. You can't just see a certain achievement, but you also have to see their sexuality. And also with Turing, it's the price that he paid for it. You can't understand one without the other. And this is why we do LGBT History Month. And you end up not straight washing and not conveniently glossing over people's history.
Crikey, Di, that was brilliant. Thank you.
The podcast that we've created is on our Exploring Surrey's Past website. And if you Google Exploring Surrey's Past, you can just search on Alan Turing. It will bring up the biography page that we've written for him, and the podcast is embedded on that, and it goes to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I can bring us up a little advert actually for that for you. Let's just do that for our viewers. But listen, do you think? I mean, this is frighteningly recent, isn't it? This history, it's so close to the times we live in. Do you think Turing would be surprised at his influence these days, and about the amount of, just the fact that we have laws named after him? Even now, we've just gone through Brexit, and the government have named the new educational scheme, the new international educational scheme, after him. It's the Turing scheme. He's still at the forefront of our minds, isn't he? Do you think he'd be surprised?
I think he was the type of guy who he would have just knuckled down and got on with things. And I think he was quite self-effacing as well. So I don't think he would have expected any of this at all. But I think that's often what happens in history. You get people who just don't think that what they're doing is anything to shout about. I mean, he was very aware that the code breaking work was incredibly important. And again, with his computing work. But what came afterwards, I think so many people just don't realise the effect that he had on those pardons for gay men. And a lot of people think that, LGBTQ plus history, it's ancient. It's when people were prosecuted in the 17th and 18th century. And it's just not. It's really recent.
Yeah, it's frighteningly recent. And, I wonder how he would have felt about that. I wonder if he would have felt a sense of pride in knowing that he's actually been such a huge inspiration and such a huge icon for the LGBT community, and brought about so much positive change, when I should imagine for him going through, the prosecution and the chemical castration and all the things he went through, it must have felt like a really negative experience for him.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I like to think he would have been proud. But also, Arnold Murray, he didn't get rehabilitation. And in actual fact, it's a very good example of how the police actually hounded gay men, because suddenly the burglary became second to the fact that Turing was gay and was having a gay relationship. And so that is what took, that's what took the forefront. And the burglary was just sort of really forgotten about. So yeah, there are lots and lots of lessons to be learned from that, I think.
Well, that's it. And to our viewers out there, to realize how recently this was, and realistically, it was only sort of 30, 40 years ago we had, police trying to lure gay men into cottaging spots and arresting them in that way. And the entrapment that was occurring, and the hounding of gay men just for simply living their lives is incredibly recent history, and it mustn't be forgotten. And this, I'm sure, is something that you guys are working on, and making sure that your catalogues reflect recent history and preserving that for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully I'll talk to you a little bit later about some of the things that people can help us with actually growing our collections.
I'd love to talk to you about that in another programme. So thank you very much to Di Stiff for her history lesson today. Di, you're an absolute star. Thank you very much.
Bless you. Anytime, Kel. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.